Hello, everyone. Welcome to Brattleboro's Town Matters podcast. This podcast is meant to be a brief update on what is happening in Brattleboro town government. I'm your host, Town Manager John Potter, broadcasting from the BCTV studios in Brattleboro, Vermont. Today, we're going to look back at what happened at the March 3rd, the March 6th, and the March 10th Brattleboro Select Board meetings. And then we'll do a review of the agenda for the upcoming special meeting on Thursday, March 20th. On Monday, March 3rd, the Select Board held a joint meeting with the Hinsdale Select Board at Hinsdale Town Hall. I will update that in the discussion that the board had at their March 6th meeting in a minute. On Thursday, March 6th, the Brattleboro Select Board convened again. At this meeting, there was an executive session followed by a consent agenda. One item was pulled from the agenda. That was the Living Memorial Park softball lights contract. That was pulled from the agenda and addressed later under regular business. The other four items were all approved on consent, and they included acceptance of an $18,500 bid for cemetery maintenance this summer, approval of a first and third class liquor license renewal for the Brattleboro Food Co-op, awarding of a $34,895 contract for maintenance work on, I think, about 55 trees in 8 of the town parks. And then finally, they approved the ratification of a parade permit for Brattleboro Area Action. The consent agenda was approved by a motion of 4-0 with one abstention. Under regular business, the first item was an update from Healthcare and Rehabilitation Services, HCRS. CEO George Karabakakis joined the meeting and talked quite a bit about the work of HCRS and how they are helping the Brattleboro community. The board discussed with Dr. Karabakakis the possibility of a drug court in Brattleboro. They also talked about the distance that people currently have to go to Windsor County to attend the drug court and how that is an issue. They also discussed the embedded clinicians that HCRS has with the police department, among other items. No motion was made for this item. The next piece of business was an update on the Living Memorial Park project, as well as consideration of the softball lights contract and a request on a use of contingency funds for the maintenance building. Recreation and Parks Director Carol Lalott first discussed the lights contract. There was a discussion about the budget for this, and no motion was made on the softball lights contract. They went on to hear about a general update on the projects there, including information about progress on the maintenance building and a request from Director Lalott on using some of the savings, the remaining contingency in the $4.1 million bond, to update and improve the interior of the maintenance building with walls that would make it much more usable for the Recreation and Parks staff. There was a motion to approve an added value change order in the amount of $79,009 for the completion of the interior spaces of the maintenance building presently under construction, and that motion passed by a vote of 5-0. The next item under regular business was the third reading of a vacant buildings ordinance. Planning Director Sue Fillion and Planning Technician Steve Hayes entered the meeting, and they discussed some minor changes since the second reading of the vacant buildings ordinance. There was talk with the board about various aspects of this ordinance, and there was a motion to adopt the changes to the Brattleboro Code of Ordinances, Chapter 8, Article 6, vacant buildings. And after a bit of further conversation and questions from the public, the board decided to proceed with that motion, and it passed by a vote of 5-0. The next item was a discussion about Bridge 54, the bridge on Route 9 going into West Brattleboro. DPW Director Dan Tyler joined the meeting and discussed a follow-up to a previous conversation the board had about this project. The board pointed out that the reductions in the cost to the project following their sending it back to VTrans was quite welcome. They went over the details of the finance and maintenance agreement that VTrans has put forward for this project, and after further discussion, that motion passed by a vote of 5-0. So the town will be proceeding with VTrans on that project, although it has not been assigned a schedule or a start date yet by VTrans. Next, the board had a discussion about their March 3rd meeting with the Hinsdale Select Board regarding Hinsdale Island and the Anna Hunt Marsh and Charles Dana bridges. The board described their take on what happened at that meeting and the questions that New Hampshire Department of Transportation were asking about. They said that they agreed to continue to meet with the Hinsdale Select Board in hopes of putting together answers or a path forward on the project. There were questions from the public about this project and about what was discussed, and quite a bit of conversation about the lack of a public safety plan for the island or the bridges, and they did not take up any motions on this issue, but plan to discuss it at a future meeting. Finally, on March 6th, a UK artist, Hells Gibson, came before the board with a public art project proposal to paint a mural in the Harmony parking lot. After some discussion with the artist about their plans, there was a motion to approve the public art project Flowers Grow In by Hells Gibson, and the board passed that by a vote of 5-0. On March 10th, this special meeting was one of their regular updates with the Brattleboro legislative delegation, state legislative delegation. And at this meeting, the board talked about their priorities for state legislation in the 2025 session. They talked about drug addiction resources. There was quite a bit of conversation around the possibility of placing a drug court in Brattleboro. They talked about drug addiction treatment, sober living programs and beds, and also ready-to-work programs. And the legislative delegation updated the select board on really good work that they were doing in those areas. They heard from Senator Hashim about pretrial diversion treatment progress that's been made. They heard about residential peer respite facilities, and they also learned about Senator Hashim's work on a mental health criminal justice bill that he hopes to introduce next session. The third item was violence prevention, and the select board learned that automatic court dates for offenders that violate conditions of release has already happened. They discussed resolving the criminal court backlog, and they also heard about efforts to prioritize funding for victim services, making funds available to help victims on a rapid basis. Under their fourth legislative priority, affordable and middle-income housing, the legislative delegation updated the board on work around changes to Act 250 and how that will be going into effect. They also discussed with Senator Harrison flexible tax increment finance legislation, and they had a conversation about reimbursing towns that carry disproportionate amounts of affordable housing. The fifth and final item on the March 10th meeting was a conversation about municipal revenue enhancement as a priority of the select board. Under this topic, the board and the delegation talked about VTrans costs for maintaining regional roadways and the percentage matches that occur with those. They discussed the proposed changes to the local option tax distribution, and they talked about reductions to the tax sale delay period. And Representative Kornheiser discussed a municipal revenue sharing bill that she hopes to introduce at some point. And that was the meeting of March 10th. The next select board meeting is a special meeting scheduled for Thursday, March 20th at 6:15 p.m. in the Select Board Meeting Room at 230 Main Street. And this is what will be on the agenda for that meeting. There will be a consent agenda with 5 items, and those include consideration of an application for an up to $8,000 municipal planning grant to help produce maps for the town plan update. There is also consideration of approving an annual entertainment license for 2 establishments, India Masala House at 889 Putney Road and Midnights at 2 High Street. They will consider 2 other items. One is approval of a $45,674 bid for planned capital replacement item of a compact tractor for the Recreation and Parks Department. And then the final item on the consent agenda is possibly approving a $115,250 bid award for removal and replacement of the roof on the Brooks Memorial Library. Under regular business, there will be 7 items. I believe in this order. This may change. There will be an update on the work of the organization known as One Brattleboro. There will then likely be a presentation by the consultants SLR about the Canal Street Safe Street and Stormwater Corridor draft plan, followed by a interim zoning bylaw amendment proposal from the Planning Commission to amend the zoning map regarding parcels with access to municipal water and sewer services and to update standards for parcels not served by municipal water and sewer. There'll be a public hearing associated with that bylaw amendment. Also on the March 20th agenda is an updating to the Planning Department permit fees, an update for the Select Board on EMS reimbursements, information about a new webpage for safe neighborhoods. Finally, we're expecting a solid waste implementation item to come before the board. That is March 20th. A couple announcements. Representative Town Meeting is scheduled for Saturday, March 22nd, starting at 8:30 a.m. in the Brattleboro Union High School Gymnasium. Documents for this meeting, including the annual report and budget information, have been published on the main RTM page of the website, brattleboro.gov. The Charter Revision Commission has rescheduled its public forum to Monday, March 31st from 6 to 8 p.m. at Brooks Memorial Library. The Commission is considering whether to recommend a change in the form of Brattleboro's annual town meeting and would like to hear public input on that matter. And finally, the Rec and Parks Department is offering a variety of sports programs and activities this spring. Visit the news section of brattleboro.gov to view their latest brochure, which features a complete lineup of events in the weeks ahead. So there's your update on what's been happening in town government in Brattleboro. Please reach out to me at the town manager's office if you have any suggestions or want to discuss anything further. There's lots of additional information on the website, brattleboro.gov, about what's discussed at select board meetings, so please check in there for agendas, reports, and backup materials. Thanks for listening.